Start it up. So this week's lecture is how your mind keeps you from the flow. So what is the flow? What do you guys think the flow is?
Goddess.
The negative talk.
Wait, did you say goddess?
Goddess, yeah.
What does that mean, Jan?
Basically, it's like the feminine aspect of the divine that just like flows through us, that is like what propels us.
Okay,
Everything.
I like it.
Intuition.
Intuition, love it.
Present moment.
Present moment, love it. Joey?
Kind of like when you're doing some sort of an assignment or something and you're just going at it and you're not even thinking about doing it.
Okay, love it. Give me 1 second, guys. I just want to get this quiet out here. Sorry about that, guys. So, the flow. The way I describe the flow is our natural, perfect, harmonious life. The way life is supposed to be. Life is supposed to be really easy, not hard at all, totally abundant, totally peaceful, totally joyful. Who has that life? Right? I don't have that life either,
I
right?
get my way in there.
How many people here, since we've known you, it's gotten easier? You feel more in what we call the flow. Okay? And that's what this whole thing is about. How many people here, when they were kids, they felt like they were in the flow? No, really? Okay. Interesting. Okay. It's our childlike state. So let's talk about this. We have two sides to us. This is what Dr. B.J. Palmer talked about. We had one side of us that was very limited and really small, and it's called our ego. Okay, this is our small self. What's the ego about? What's the purpose of the ego?
Security.
Protection. Survival. So what's the ego all about?
Self-talk.
Self, yourself. How does it talk to us? Through love or through fear?
Fear.
Fear. When you're born, how much of this do you have?
None.
Very little to none. We also call this your educated mind or educated intelligence. And you're born with 0% of it, and throughout life, you collect more and more and more. There's a purpose to it. It's not bad. But you have this whole other side to yourself that we call your innate self. You can call it your higher self. What's the purpose of this part of you?
To love.
How about this? To guide, to love, and to heal. And heal what? Heal self or maybe others? What's this more about?
Self, I think.
This is more about community. I want you guys to think about it this way. Your body, all the cells of the body work together. What is it called when one cell of the body forgets the rest of the entire organization and starts to only focus on self? What do we call that cell?
Selfish.
We call that cancer. That's what cancer is.
Oh.
Okay? How many people here think human beings, for the most part, are a cancer to this planet? Okay? Why is that?
Out of touch.
Out of touch. So if I'm a heart cell and I only think about myself, am I worried about, let's say, my lungs? Am I worried about my intestines? No. And as a result of that, you create dis-ease inside the body. Now let's take the human species. What are we worried about mostly?
Money.
Self.
Ourself. If we're a little bit more advanced, we worry about other humans. But how many people of us worry about, let's say, animals too? How about trees? How about the dirt? How about the bacteria? How about the little cockroaches inside your apartment? Right? The more conscious you become, the more you're in this innate body, you love everything. Make sense? Okay. So, and how does this talk to us? In fear or in love? Enthusiasm. When you feel enthusiastic about something, it's coming from your higher self.
Intuitive also?
intuitive. Let's call it your intuitive mind. Hey, you were intuitive there, Richard. How much of this are you born with? Hey, when you first are born, do you have to read a book on how to digest your food? Or do you do it automatically? What did you say?
I said not usually.
Not usually, right? Or does your body do it automatically? Is there an innate, infinite wisdom within you that knows how to do all of that stuff? Okay. So if I could put this on a picture, it would be like this. As a human, we have 3 parts to us: spirit, soul/mind, and the body. So we started a Tuesday night class. We do this every Tuesday night, called Mastering Your Mind. Because what I'm talking about is, which one is the spirit here? Left or right?
Right.
This is your spirit, your higher self, whatever you want to call it. You can call it whatever you want. You want to call it God, you can call it God if you want. Okay? This is this level. Again, does this have a purpose?
Yes.
Absolutely. When this is used like a tool, that's when life is good. But the problem with humans is we are born coming from the spirit directing the soul or the mind, and that directing the body. But as we get older, guess what happens to us? What do we start to fill up on?
Crap.
Education. Crap, as you said. Education. And as our culture, what do we value more than anything? Intuition or education? Right? Knowledge. Oh, these people tell me it's true, it must be true. So what starts to happen is this veil starts to form. Like this wall starts to form. That starts to block us. And it gets thicker, and it gets thicker, and it gets thicker. Some of us have really, really, really thick walls. And this is what we call our ego / our personal will. When you're a child, what's your personal will?
Have fun.
You're just in the moment, aren't you? You're in the present moment at all times. But as you get older, what starts to happen? You start to not be able to feel this part of you, and you don't operate out of this part of you. You start to operate only from the mind level. And what does the mind deal with? Is the mind in the present or no?
And worry.
Past or
Worry.
future.
So here's the thing. The mind starts to try to plan the future. So it's worried about the future, I guess, or it's worried about the past. So then you start to operate in fear. You start to try to figure everything out. You start to do what everybody else is telling you to do. So then you start to get this template of life that was created, right? So as a kid, who told you how to live? Who taught us how to live? Your parents, maybe your teachers, maybe preachers. And what ends up happening, if you live in this level of mind, guess what you grow up exactly like? Your parents, teachers, your preachers. And it's this continual cycle. I talked about this. I was on Facebook about a couple weeks ago, and there was this kid I went to elementary school with, middle school, high school. I come from a really small town, and there's a lot of people who stay in the small town. And he married a girl from the high school. They had kids, and I'm looking at these pictures of these kids who are now in elementary school, and it's like a carbon copy of this same guy that I went to school with when he's in elementary school. And he's going to the same programs, doing the same thing that he did as a kid. And you just start thinking to yourself, of, wow, it's like this karmic cycle that's just repeating itself over and over and over again. Is there any uniqueness to that person? So, well, here's the deal. I had, someone referred to me this really beautiful book. It's about the Orthodox Church. And it talks in there about God. And a lot of people think the more holy you get, or the more spiritual you get, people think of being like a monk or a nun or whatever it is, and you just go and you live this life where you sit in a cave and just meditate and pray all day. And this book was saying, no, that's not what it's about. The more spirit-filled that you get, you actually become more unique, more individual. Who's here for the archetype talk? Right? You fulfill your archetypal role even more. So you start to become way more diverse. You break away from those karmic patterns. You don't do what your parents did. You don't just get a regular 9-to-5 job like you're supposed to do. You start to do some weird stuff, right? And everyone starts to look at you like, wow, you're weird. Who here has that experience? Where maybe the first thing you do is you start to eat like vegan. People are like, huh, you're a little weird. Why are you eating that way? Because it doesn't fit the template that we've been taught. And then maybe for work, you're like, you know what? I'm not happy here. I'm gonna quit. And they're like, what are you gonna do? It's like, I don't know. I'm gonna travel for a little bit. Your friend's like, wow, that's weird. You're a weirdo. And then you find maybe your calling in life, and it's something really different than everybody else. But this is what it means to be spirit-filled, okay? B.J. Palmer, the founder of chiropractic, this is the way he lived his life. He didn't live in his mind at all. The mind is all about control. And when you try to control something, you actually end up making more chaos. Think of the human body. When you're in your mind, when you forget that, guess what? This is controlling all of your health. If you forget that, you start to get in the level of the mind. How scary is it to try to control the human body?
Horrifying.
How complicated is the human body? Right? What should your heart rate be?
Something over 60 or 90. I
Right?
don't know.
People tell us this, right? There's a range it should be in. What should your blood pressure be? Think about our healthcare system. What is it based on? Looking at numbers and chemicals and trying to control them by taking stuff to control it. But you know what you end up doing by doing that? You create way more chaos in the body. It's a paradox. The more you surrender control and you let this control, guess what's going to put your blood pressure? It knows what your blood pressure should be. This. And the more you surrender, it may look like chaos, but guess what's happening? You're actually creating more control for your body. So the way B.J. Palmer lived his life was not only with health did he do that, but his entire life. What he would do is he would wake up, he would be in his heart, he would feel what brought him enthusiasm, what brought him joy, and he would do that. If he had an intuitive thought, he would follow that. And he was in the present moment. And his life was crazy. You'd never heard of such a crazy life. This guy was somebody who was pretty much homeless at the age of 18, and he ended up buying a newspaper, or creating his own newspaper company. This is back in the early 1900s. Became very successful, opening up his own school, opening up the first radio station west of the Mississippi, hired people like gave Ronald Reagan his first job, went around the world, adjusted czars, adjusted a couple presidents. I mean, just the craziest life. He had like the biggest. He went over to the Orient, bought like the biggest Buddha statue in the world, brought it over here. I mean, just weird stuff. You know, if you read his life story, it's amazing. And the guy ended up being super wealthy when he passed away. Anyone know Napoleon Hill?
Yeah.
He wrote Think and Grow Rich. The story Think and Grow Rich was Napoleon Hill was commissioned by Andrew Carnegie to write a book on success. And he gave him access to 500 people, the most successful people on the planet, people like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. So Napoleon Hill interviewed all these people that we know of. And after meeting all these people, he said B.J. Palmer was the most interesting person he'd ever met. Pretty cool, right? Because all the other people worked from their mind space. They would try to sit there and they would try to imagine their life, and they would do like law of attraction stuff and create. But B.J. Palmer didn't do that. He surrendered fully and let this unfold his life the way it was supposed to unfold. Does that make sense to everybody? So when you're in the mind, it stops the flow of spirit. I like to picture the flow like this river bringing us to a certain direction. Meaning this, if we all close our eyes right now, everyone close your eyes, and tune into your heart. Take a deep breath in, all the way out. I want you to stay there right now in your heart, just for a minute. Feel the vibration of your heart. And Everyone open your eyes. Now here's the next test. While you're listening to me speak, the rest of the lecture, be in your heart. Feel your heart. How many people here throughout the day are this conscious of their heart? Right? Imagine if you were. This is where we've been ignoring. Where do we reside mostly? You can feel that, can't you? Here's what we do. Say, hey, what do you want to do right now? What do you say to your friends typically? I don't know. What do you want to do? Things like that. Versus tuning into your heart and really feeling what brings you enthusiasm in that moment and doing it no matter what. Why don't we do that? Here's the deal. Let's say you wake up in the morning and you're really feeling your heart and you're like, I don't want to go to work. Every day. How many people have that experience? Raise your hand. Okay, here's the question. Why do we do it? Here we go. Here comes the rational mind. I have fear. I need security. What else am I supposed to do? And I'm not saying everyone just quit your jobs and kind of, unless you guys want to. We can start a community. Let's do it. So, why do we do that? Because we're not, and this is myself included, is because we slowly need to break away those programs that have been taught to us. I guarantee you, if you did, if you just jumped all in and said, I'm done, I'm just going to follow my heart, where do you think that would lead you? What'd you say?
Homeless.
Homeless. Hey, you might be homeless temporarily.
Happiness.
But where do you think it would lead you? Guess what? Who here wants total freedom? Who here, what would happen? You'd probably meet somebody perfect or another situation where it would guide you perfectly. That's what B.J. Palmer did. Pretty wild, right? So there's different ways we can do this. You know, you can just jump all in and just be like, I'm done mine, follow the heart. Or what most of us are doing is we're slowly breaking away those programs. We're getting less and less in our mind, more and more in our heart, and we're letting those programs kind of just go away from us over time. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go to this next part. So this is what a pure life looks like. That's a heart. You know what that is?
No.
Brain.
It's a brain. I'm drawing this. I'm like, no one's gonna know what that is.
It doesn't have like.
Someone wants to draw a brain
like
next
a
time.
tornado or something.
Tornado, either heart or tornadoes. So this is it. What we can picture a pure life is this. Is every single moment of every day being heart conscious. Who here is still heart conscious? Or did we lose it already? Like 2 people like, oh yeah. I think I forgot about it too, so it makes you feel better. Being so in tune with your heart every second of every day, you follow that no matter what. You live a life of peace, of joy, of harmony, of total faith and trust. That's what a pure life is. Okay? Has nothing to do with health. But we're going to talk about how health relates to this. But a pure life is purely being you, authentically being you, which is your higher self flowing through. So how the heck does health relate to this? Why are we getting healthy? You can only live this way if you have balance. So what's this? This is the yin-yang, which represents complete and total balance. And when you have, and there's 2 forces in there, but when these 2 forces are balanced, you have a complete whole. So I want to talk about the masculine and the feminine, which we have within us. And when they are balanced, that's when we're whole and complete. That's when we're healthy. That's when we can actually be in our heart. The reason that we're so in our mind all the time and we're about control is because for the past, 2,000 years, what has the world been about? Has it been more masculine or more feminine? Right? So if you understand these principles, these are ancient principles. People get offended when I say this, but it's true. The masculine is about control and order. What do you think the feminine is about?
Chaos.
Absolute chaos. You can relate to that, huh? Okay. Just kidding. There's beauty to chaos. That's the artistic, beautiful side. It's the side that we're talking about of not that monotony over and over and over again. So when I say chaos, it's not a bad thing, right? But remember, when you get too controlled, what does control look like? Think about the way our houses are built. They're built like just like squares or rectangles, and everything is square edged. Everything is so controlled. Think of like a concrete city, how controlled and grid-like it is. What happens when you get too controlled? See,
Revelation.
life always finds balance no matter what. So think of a complete dictatorship, a communist regime. When you have that much control, what do the people end up doing? Revolting. You can't handle that much control. And then how about a society that's completely chaotic? There's no order at all. What ends up happening? Dictator rises up to bring order and control. But I want you to realize something. Our society has been mostly, and it's not bad or good, it's just the way it's been. It's been more of a masculine society. And when I say that, who's been more masculine? All of us. We all have masculine and feminine energies within us. Does that make sense? So we've all been on the control side of life. So guess what gets activated more and more and more? The thing that's meant to control more and more and more. Okay? So when you have that, we've been in complete control mode. I want you guys to understand, what's the story of Adam? How was Adam created in the Bible? You had God, you had dirt, and what was the thing in the middle? God breathed into the dirt. The breath of God brought animation and life to this dirt. Okay? It's the same here. Inside our body, we have this infinite wisdom. By the way, is God something that's tangible? Can you measure God?
No.
Can you see God? Can you put it in a glass and drink God? Right?
Kind of.
How about dirt? Absolutely, right? How about this breath? Kind of yes and no. We'll talk about it a little deeper here. Inside your body, you have infinite wisdom that's controlling everything. Can you measure that? It's immaterial. Now, what are your cells made out of? When you die, what does your cells turn into?
Dust.
Dirt. It's made of the same stuff. It's the material. Does this make sense? So what is animating? What's the in-between?
Life energy.
There is a life energy that connects the two. And how does this relate to this? There are really three parts inside of you. You have the infinite wisdom, which is the guidance. That's the masculine. This you can call Father God. So what do you call this? What's the dirt called? What's the earth called?
Mother
Mother
Nature.
Nature, Mother Earth. Why do we think we call it that? Right? Mother Earth. The stuff that Mother Earth produces is what we put in our bodies. And what is our body made out of? Of that. It's the material. And what connects the two is energy, is the connector of it all. Does that make sense? So you have three parts to it. The energy is what brings the balance between the two as well. So there's a really cool book called The Essene Gospel of Peace, and one of the principles it says is this. When we're talking about the heart and listening to the guidance, that's the masculine part of it. Listening to the Father's words. But you can't do that unless you're actually nurtured by the mother. So in the Essene Gospel, it talks about how can a child heed his father's lessons if he wasn't ever nurtured by the mother and brought up properly. Does that make sense? So I want you to think about what's happened in our society. How do we honor, or how are we nurtured by Mother Nature? The food we eat. So I want you to think about this. How does Mother Earth nurture us? The foods that we eat. So what foods does Mother Earth produce?
Plants.
Let's just put plants on there. So in this Essene Gospel, it actually talks about that. Wow, we are eating rotten flesh and putting that inside of our body for nutrients. Okay, we are not listening and being nurtured by Mother Earth. How about this? What else should we be doing?
Breathing clean air. Working the earth.
How important is a mother's hug as a child? Just knowing that you're loved and nurtured. So how about laying on the earth, actually being hugged by dirt? How many of us are grown up and we don't even touch dirt anymore? We're afraid of the earth. Make sense? How about getting sunshine?
Barefoot.
Yeah, that's what grounding is, right? A little barefoot. Just being outside. How many of us still climb in the trees? Interact with nature every day. You know, there's a thing called forest bathing. It's a big thing now in Asian culture. You'll have people who have terminal diseases, people who are really mentally ill, and they'll just go out deep into a forest for a few days, and they'll come out totally healed up. They're being nurtured by Mother Earth. So what happens when we don't do these things?
Being disconnected from that.
Yeah, our vessel is not clean. We have complete distortion and other entities like parasites living inside of us. So can you hear this message that's always playing in our heart? Absolutely not, right? So what ends up happening is our mind starts to go and it gets more and more controlled, and we're completely disconnected from this message, and we're not in our heart anymore. Sickness, massive ego, and personal will that forms because of that. So that's why at Pure Life, what's our first goal here? What are we doing here? Number one, we adjust. Why do we adjust? To maximize the life energy that's connecting everything together. It's breathing life into our cells, and it's the energy that's speaking to our heart right now. You need to have an open, clear system so that nerve energy has a place to go. But what else are we doing? Why do you think we fast?
To get clean.
To get clean. Why do you think we eat plant-based meals? It's to clean our vessel out. It's short-term to get healthy, long-term, so that message inside of us gets louder and louder and louder. How many people here have had like a total change of life since they've been getting care? Anybody? So you'll notice your life starts to really take direction. New jobs, new relationships, end of relationship, a whole bunch of crazy stuff, right? Because your path starts to get corrected from where we were. How about this? How do we honor the Father? What does that mean? The wisdom. It means this. I'm going to write a word here. It's what we were talking about before. Once this happens, the cleaner that we get, the more that we fast, the more we get nurtured by Mother Nature, the louder this voice starts to get. And then you'll start to hear this heart more and more. You'll be more conscious of it. And then now is the real work. Do you trust it? Do you take that leap? How much are you willing to trust your heart and make those changes? Make sense? What happens when you don't?
Stuck.
Yeah. You feel stuck in life. Do you feel free? You feel completely bound, stuck, depressed, anxious, sad, lonely. Anyone heard of the dark night of the soul before? No, I've talked about it before. It's an interesting thing. It's kind of this thing that happens. It's a spiritual crisis. I forgot the saint that first talked about it. There's a book. This saint, I can find it for you guys. He wrote about the dark night of the soul. And what it is you'll start on this process and you'll start to get really clear and really conscious. And you'll start to feel this connection more and more. And then all of a sudden, you have the biggest depression of your life. You feel like everything goes away. You don't even know why you're depressed. It's like utter horrible turmoil. Anyone experienced this ever? And you're like, what the heck is going on? What's happening is this wall is being obliterated. It's called an egoic death. So what happens when we grow up with this wall like this, we think that we are this. We identify with the mind. We think we are the mind. And what starts to happen is this wall starts to completely go away, and they call it an ego death, meaning you think you're literally dying. But you're not dying. Your ego is dying. You're actually starting to feel your higher self come through. And the way this saint talks about it is that you're actually developing a whole new sense. And the sense is actually feeling this love from Spirit inside of you that's always been there. So a lot of people feel like abandoned by God, and they feel no connection to God. And what you realize is that the love has always been there from the day you were born. It's just that we've been so out of our heart, we've been so in our head, we haven't been able to feel it. So we've been blaming and saying, oh man, there's no love here, we don't know where God is, why is the world the way it is? And it's because no one's actually heeding the messages. Does that make sense? Everyone's been in their own head and their own personal will. So this will of the Spirit is not coming through. All of our own personal will is coming through. Over and over and over again. And it's just like this. I used this analogy a few weeks ago. It's like a candle. As a child, if you tell your kid, hey, don't put your hand over that candle, you're going to get burned. What's the kid have to do? They're going to put their hand on the candle, they're going to burn it, and they're going to have to experience that burn to understand, oh, maybe I should listen to that voice next time. And they probably won't, and they'll do a couple of things, but they have to experience the pain and the suffering. So what is all of humankind doing right now? Right? Experiencing that. How many people know, like, I probably shouldn't go out drinking that way, but you're going to do it anyway, right? Because short term it seems fun. And what happens the next day? How do you feel? Ugh. You feel burned, right? But we're becoming more and more conscious of our own energy and feeling, wow, if I do this action, what happens to your energy? What happens to your heart? Do you feel elated or do you feel ugh? When you're around certain people, you might start to feel ugh around certain people. What does that mean?
Don't be around them.
Right? Or we could be in self-punishment and feel like I have to get burned over and over again. But the more we start to love ourselves, the more clear we get. We notice we start to hang out with people who lift us up more and more and more. Make sense? So, what blocks us from this life? Number one, the subluxation, that disconnect. This was the main purpose of chiropractic. Had nothing to do with health. Had to do with removing the obstacle so that the finite can know itself as the infinite. That's what the whole purpose of it was. To make this voice louder and louder so that you start to follow this voice. That's number one. Number two, parental trauma. This is a huge one. How does this relate? How do we relate to the masculine and the feminine? What's our first experience with it? Our parents. So let me ask you something. If you had a dad who abandoned you as a child, what is your thought of the masculine?
Untrustworthy.
Yeah, they suck. They're not trustworthy. So let me ask you this. What we're talking about is listening to your heart and trusting it. Is that person, they could be the clearest person in the world, but what do they think of that divine voice within? I don't trust it. It's not trustworthy. I have to take control of my own life. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or if you've never had a mom who nurtured or loved you, right? It's the same thing. You feel like you have to control your life. You're not going to be able to nourish or even be allowed to be nourished by someone or something else. So you're always going to be on guard and trying to protect yourself. So we have to get over parental trauma. What's the best way to do that?
Meditate.
What's that? Meditate? It started to, there's some people who do inner child work, things like that. The way I like to go about it is to think about it this way. Your parents are just human beings. And they probably had a very similar or probably even worse childhood than you had too. So imagine a child trying to raise somebody. Right? When we have parental trauma, we are stuck as a child. We can't grow up. So the way I look at it is understanding these are not your parents. The parents you were born to are not your real parents. They're just two humans who were there to give birth to you and just to watch after you, make sure you didn't die, so that you could actually grow up. But who are your real parents?
Father God, Mother Earth.
Mother Earth, Father God. Which ones have always shown you unconditional love? Your mom probably doesn't show you unconditional love. Anyone's mom ever get really mad at them and yell at them for something?
Very critical.
Right? Same with dads. Parents mess up. They're human beings. We're supposed to mess up. That's what we do. So it's just seeing them as human beings, not your parents. And then when you see your parents, how long has Mother Earth been there? How much can you destroy Mother Earth? Well, how does she react?
Still loves you.
Right? Does she stop producing fruit for you? That you damaged me? Right? How horrible are human beings to Earth, but guess what Mother Earth still does? Still loves us constantly and just nourishes us and is quiet. Just background, nurturing, loving, nurturing, loving, nurturing, loving. How about Father God? Right? It's always there. Even when you're cursing it out, that voice is always there in your heart, letting you know you're feeling elated when you're on the right path and you're feeling drained when you're off that path. And no matter what, just showing unconditional love, unconditional love. You can mess up, you can do something you weren't supposed to do, but you can check in that moment, check back into your heart, and you can find unconditional love and enthusiasm again, just like that. Does that make sense? And when you start to accept them as your parents, guess what happens? You start to grow up. You start to feel better. You get out of your mind because you don't need to think so much, because what are you trusting? Yeah. That's how you get out of the mind. Does this make sense to everybody? Because I'm kooky. Okay. So, and this is what starts to destroy that mind and that ego. So getting over that parental trauma is a huge, huge, huge one. And then obviously being nourished, so eating a plant-based diet, fasting. And by the way, even when we're eating food, I know a lot of us get into our heads about that, don't we? Let our mind try to do it. But when you start fasting and clearing out a little bit, how many people have had this experience of letting their body start to decide what they eat? Letting their spirit, you pick up a food, you're like, oh, I want this, you try to bite it, and it's like, ugh, I can't eat this right now. So this whole debate about like, oh, cooked food is not good food, this is great, this is bad, it's all head stuff. Instead of letting your heart start to decide what you should be eating. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just going by that, you're your own doctor, you're your own person that can tell you how to do this stuff. Does that make sense? So, and last one, I should put this on there. By the time we start to get in this path and we start to honor ourselves, most of us have had a pretty big wall built up. And now comes the work of breaking this wall down over and over and over again. A really good way to do that is to start to meditate and master your mind. Understand pulling away from the mind and getting its control away from you. And that's what meditation is all about. So our Tuesday night classes, if you guys ever want to come, what it's about is understanding how to start quieting the mind and using it as a tool. So instead of it using you, you start to use it. Make sense? Awesome. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So there's, religious people that believe that, you have to follow certain things from the Bible, because most of the religious organizations don't. But they feel like that is God speaking to them. But that's still ego, right? Isn't that?
It depends. So, for example, this right here comes right from Orthodox Christianity. I think what ends up happening is when you get to the bare basics of every religion, they're all saying the same thing, right? And this might offend somebody, so I'm sorry if I offend you. I don't want to get into the world of religion and what you believe. It's perfect. But what I want you to realize is that at some point, if somebody's telling you what God is, then that's coming from their mind to you. And that's true. I can only speak of, let's say, Orthodox Christianity. It's not about going and hearing someone lecture about God. What it's about is going and listening and feeling the Holy Spirit come into you and guide you. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And if anyone else is into any religions, it'd be beautiful that maybe afterward talk about this and have a cool discussion. But it's really hard. Why can't we talk about religions? It's hard to even have a conversation with somebody of a different religion. Anyone feel that way? Mm-hmm. Because it's like, wow, what gets involved? The mind, fear, anger, control. As opposed to just letting it flow and realizing what it's all about, right? If you want to honor God and you want to honor God, but you have different religions, it's like, do we have to fight over, or can we, oh wow, I love your perspective, I appreciate your perspective. It doesn't cause any harm, right? Same with politics too, by the way. Right? Any other questions? None? I hope you guys enjoyed tonight. Tomorrow night, Tuesday night, if you guys want to come, it's a really nice night. Saturday, it's our last breakfast talk of the year. I'm probably going to shift it up a little bit too. So if you haven't been, I would love to have you there. If you have any friends or family, please let them know. And that's it, guys. See you next week, okay? Awesome. Love you guys.